Hi everyone, my name is Steph, this is the Novelty Corner and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a Books Beside My Bed video for you where I wrap up the last 7 days worth of reading. This was the last week of my school holidays, my summer break, so there are 10 things that I'm going to talk about that I read between the 21st and the 27th of January. Like, I'm really sad that I'm not going to have time to just marathon read books for the next 10 weeks, but also I probably need a break from it. Potentially 2 of these books will be some of my top books of the year already, which is just amazing. Like, it was a great reading week. I do have 2 young adult titles that I'm just going to talk about really briefly. They will have more in-depth reviews on Little Bookish Teacher at some point. The first one is The Lorikeet Tree by Paul Jennings, which comes out on the 31st of January. Paul Jennings is a very well-known, beloved children's author here in Australia. His books were popular as I was growing up. He used to write very funny, comedic, very kid humor style books, which are the ones that I read in school, and more recently he has had very hard-hitting, very topical middle grade and young adult titles. The Lorikeet Tree is a younger YA title, so not necessarily for the older YA audiences. It's fairly short, and it follows Emily, who is one half of a set of twins. She and her brother live with their father, and their father has recently been diagnosed with terminal brain tumor. And so it is set over the course of a few months as their father's condition deteriorates and how they both cope with that. The family lives on a property that is trying to regrow native vegetation here in Australia and to encourage local wildlife back, and Emily is very passionate about that and often uses her focus on that to deal with her father's condition, and that sort of conflicts with her brother, who is very much a dreamer and who needs other things to help cope with what's going on with their father. Beautifully written, very hard-hitting. You could give this to older middle grade readers, but I would definitely let them know about the content of the book before you give it to them, because it is quite emotional, but beautiful. And the lorikeets refer to the rainbow lorikeets that we have here in Australia. I actually have lots that live around where I am. They're absolutely beautiful, and these are the colours of their feathers. So, gorgeous book. I also read The Upwelling by Lystra Rose. This is an Australian First Nations young adult title. It is a time slip novel. I thought it was a fantasy, and I suppose in some ways it kind of is, but it's more that SFF blend, because Kira ends up in a time slip back into the past where she meets with her family's clan from the past, and together alongside Nan and Tani, they end up having to confront a man who has claimed a lot of power and threatens the balance of the dreaming, which is part of Aboriginal culture. And it was a really interesting story. As an adult reader, I have to be very aware when I'm reading young adult titles that the pacing is very different from adult romance novels, which is probably why I like adult romance novels a little bit more, because even a slow burn story has a very different pace to a young adult novel, particularly one that deals with such heavy SFF, as well as lots and lots of cultural undertones, because it requires me to read in a different way, and sometimes it takes me a lot longer to switch into that. So while I found the pacing to be a challenge to get through that, that's not necessarily a reflection of the book. I think it's more a reflection of me. What I did love was the incorporation of traditional language in here, and there is an awesome glossary at the back of the book that goes through the language and the terms used and what that relates to. This does have a heavy focus on surfing and the Aboriginal people who live by the waterways, and it was just really cool, and I would definitely be interested in checking out more of Lystra Rose's work in the future. This book was also shortlisted for the Premier's Literary Awards for this year, and that's why I picked it up. Moving into one of the books that will probably be on my favourites list of 2023, The Rest of the Story by Tal Bauer. Now, I read Gravity at the end of 2022. It was the last book that I read for the year. Absolutely loved and adored it. It was an hockey romance. This is also an hockey romance set in the same world. And while there are references to characters from Gravity, you can read this as a standalone. Honestly, this one made me cry in the first couple of chapters. So this is single POV from Morgan's perspective. He's an aging NHL player. He ends up being traded to one of the worst teams in the league, to the point where one of his thoughts is, people don't know whether this team is just that bad or if they're doing it on purpose. And so he's concerned. He's got a 1-year contract with them. He knows someone who's on the team, and he gets in contact with them before he moves and just says, look, I'm coming to the team. And this teammate says, great, when you get to town, we need to chat. And so very quickly he sits down and has a conversation with this guy that he knows, and he finds out that something is horrifically wrong in this team. And when he arrives to the first practice, what he sees is a bunch of absolutely beaten down, emotionally withdrawn veterans and terrified rookies. because the team captain runs the hockey team like it's his own personal fiefdom and has been allowed to get away with it to the point where he has physically, emotionally, and in some cases sexually traumatized the people on his team. So the whole thing is just toxic, and Morgan walks into it, and within the first 24 hours, he puts a stop to it. The VP of the team is a former women's hockey champion, and she's fairly new, and she can't get the team to confide in her, but Morgan walks in and he stands up for them, and suddenly these, particularly the rookies, just look up to him as this person who stood up for them when no one else either knew or would or could. And like, this is only in the first couple of chapters that this happens. Like, it is full on. And then from there, Morgan is made co-captain of the team, which is not something that he thought he would take on. He doesn't see himself as a leader, and he, is convinced he's only there for a year. Like, he doesn't want to commit, but he can't walk away from these guys who he's just seen have been through the absolute ringer. And so Morgan and the VP, who I've just mentally forgotten her name, but she's awesome. I absolutely loved her. She's one of the best characters in the book. In fact, all of the characters in this book are amazing. So it's Morgan, the VP, and one of the trainers basically help to build this team back up. And they do it alongside Shay, who is another rookie, but he's slightly older. He went through college hockey and then was drafted as a rookie to the NHL. So he's got a few years of experience on the other rookies. And it's the relationship between Morgan and Shay as they work together to bring this team together, figure out their relationship, and like, their relationship is just beautiful. There is no third act breakup in here. Just a beautiful book. Like, I have not stopped thinking about this book since I read it, and I feel like I've been thinking about this book for months. Like, if I could shove this at people, I would, because it's great. I think I mostly gave all of the content warnings, all of that abuse, the toxic workplace, survivorship, and also a history of domestic abuse, which is not explicit on page, but is referenced. Then I read Hat Trick Heart by Ella Market. This was a Kindle Unlimited title that I had. This is a Why Choose Hockey romance between a romance writer who is told by her agent she needs to write something fresh and new, and she decides that she's going to start writing hockey romances because she is very knowledgeable of the sport. She lives with her best friend who is a hockey star. She's basically his good luck mascot, and she has been in love with him forever. And he and his best friend on the team are forced to confront sort of their past when another friend from their past who they've had a falling out with rejoins the team, and they have to work out their relationship because the heroine has a relationship with all of them. The major conflict in here has to do with the fact that it gets out that she's writing a hockey romance, and she's used eventually who become her partners as inspiration for her book, which is not a trope that I love when that is the source of conflict. Like, just tell people that that's what you're doing from the start. They have a right to know. Like, you're literally asking for trouble when you don't talk about it. In terms of being a Why Choose book, this one was interesting because two of the men end up in a relationship. She ends up in a relationship with her best friend. They all have scenes together. So while there is some sword crossing, it's not between all of the men. And it was really interesting the way that their relationship developed. And I liked that. I just wish the third act had not been that particular conflict because I just don't like it. I also read Fake Girlfriend for Chinese New Year by Jackie Lau. This is continuing the Holidays with the Wong series. I think I did skip the Christmas one just because I want to save that for reading at Christmas time, or at least Christmas in July. This is a very short, very cute story about a guy who asks his best friend to be his fake date to his family's Chinese New Year so that they won't try to matchmake him after the disastrous Thanksgiving matchmaking issue. What he doesn't know is that his best friend is just head over heels for him. She absolutely adores him, and she goes along with pretending this, and suddenly he starts to develop feelings, and then it gets complicated, and it's all that sort of fake dating when the other person is oblivious sort of drama. But it was great. Like, Jackie Lau just writes really fun holiday romances, and I was excited to read this one around Chinese New Year, and it's always fun when you can tee up those holiday romances to match the holidays. And the fact that we don't always see Chinese New Year holiday romances is just, why aren't there more? Like, they need to be present. I'm sure they're out there, but they're not, front and center, and they should be. Okay, and then the other book that I just absolutely adored, and this was one of my most anticipated releases of 2022, and then I didn't read it because I was just so nervous about picking it up, and it was In a Jam by Kate Canterbary. Now, I had only previously read one other book by Kate Canterbary, and I had really enjoyed it. Like, it wasn't a top favorite, but it was one that I enjoyed well enough. But this one sounded really interesting because it was a small town marriage of convenience story with a single guy who's raising his niece as his adopted daughter and running, this produce farm. And then, of course, I just got nervous about reading it. And then Kirsty read it and absolutely loved it. And I remember just thinking, I just have to read it. Just just read it. If Kirsty loved it, you will like it. And I did. Like, I do not have enough stars or praise to give this book. It was so engrossing from the very first page. So this is about Shay, who inherits a tulip farm, and it comes with the condition that she has to be married within a year. This property is next door to another one, which happens to be run by Noah, who is a guy that she knew when she was living in the town for she lived in the town for 2 years with her grandmother or her step grandmother. I can't remember which one it is, but she lived next door to Noah, and he used to pick her up and give her a lift to school. They were sort of different ends of the social spectrum, but they really enjoyed each other's company, and then they went their separate ways and they haven't talked since. But he's come back to town. He's now got this sort of market farm empire. Like, it's amazing. Don't read this book if you don't have, you know, nice food around you, because there's a lot of food descriptions and it all sounded delicious. He's also adopted his niece because his sister, her mother, is in jail and is unlikely to be released. So he's left with this 5-year-old who is precocious and loves to dress as a pirate and swears like nobody's business. And Shay sort of stumbles into their orbit again, and Noah is kind of reluctant to get close to her because he had a crush on her, but they, you know, it never went anywhere. The thing I loved about this book, it had the perfect kind of hero type that I just adore. And in fact, I think I sent it to Brie. He is the grumpy cinnamon roll, absolute alpha in the bedroom character. The dirty talk that came out of this man's mouth after, you know, he just doesn't say anything for the first part of the book was top notch. And it was just the best reading experience. It had all of the small town cozy vibes while still having a really great story. The child in the story was not annoying. And she was front and center for a lot of the book. There is a huge plot that involves her and Shay and Noah, and it was just fantastic. I'm very picky about kids in books. They have to be done well, because you just have this child who's going through trauma, and Noah is doing his best despite the fact that he doesn't know how to be a father. Shay comes into their orbit. I forgot to mention, she's a teacher, and she spends some time teaching Jenny, who's a little bit behind. But like, it was just the most perfect combination of things. And I have ordered a physical copy of this book. Bloody expensive, but I needed to have a copy of it. It was just so good. I will just say though, for people who need to be aware of content and trigger warnings, there's an absentee parent, mentions of death of a parent. There is obviously a parent who is incarcerated. There is a little bit of fat shaming by a non-main character. And there's also teasing and bullying of the child. Also off page, but mentioned. So just be aware of that and be kind to yourself when you're reading it. I also reread Clean Sweep by listening to the graphic audio. I'm not going to talk too much about this because there will be a live show that will have already happened by the time this has happened, and I have recently talked about the book. It is an urban fantasy, paranormal, sci-fi combo with some hints at romance thrown in there for future books. Absolutely delightful. If you want space vampires and genetically created werewolves, this is the series for you. The graphic audio is amazing. I think I liked it because I had read the book physically before and I knew everything, and I literally just put it on while I was doing a diamond painting, and it was top notch. There is musical highlights through the whole thing. Some of them are a little bit kitsch, but I didn't care. I love the whole thing. It was great. I also read Come As You Are by Jess K. Hardy. This again was one of my KU titles. This is like sort of like a Gen X romance between two characters who are 40 and 50 plus. Ashley has taken over running her family's ski mountain after the death of her father, and they're in huge financial debt, and her mother suggests that they hire some men from the local sober living home because they're cheaper, they need to do the work, and it means they'll have workers. And so Ashley reluctantly agrees after she meets the guy that runs the sober living home. Madigan is a former rock star, former addict who is trying to make the best of his life now, and he just falls for Ashley straight away. And the two end up in a relationship, which is obviously complicated because he's constantly dealing with his past addiction, and there are things that are triggers for him in the book. He's also got a group of men who are also addicts who are trying to stay clean. There's a lot of discussions around that in the book, and that part of it was great because you don't often see it discussed in that much detail, but you can tell that these men have a close-knit relationship because they want to make this work, because they want to be able to have relationships with their families again and with other people. And like, it was great. The one thing I will say, there is a very toxic ex who is trying to buy the mountain from Ashley, and he stoops at nothing to try and get what he wants. Not a great character. Steel by Anna Hackett also came out. This is the 4th book in the Sentinel Security series. This one is about the leader of Sentinel Security, Killian Hawke, and his much led up to relationship with Devon, who is also known as Hellfire. She is a current CIA agent, and at the very start of the book, she has been targeted for assassination. She comes to warn Killian because he is also on the list, and then the two have to work together to try and track down who is actually trying to kill them and stop them. And it was just great because you have these two kick-ass characters who are extremely competent, are used to relying on themselves, and suddenly they have to work together and confront their feelings all at once. It is super steamy, it is full of action, lots of explosions and car chases and you name it, and loved every second of it. And the final book that I'm going to talk about in this video is Beauty and the Baller by Madden-Mills. Again, this was on my KU title. If you can't tell, I've been trying to read through my Kindle Unlimited titles because of one, the readathon that's been going on this week, and two, because that's part of my Read What You Own challenge. I want to get this Kindle TBR down to like only a handful of books. Beauty and the Baller is about NFL quarterback Ronan, who loses his fiancée and his career in the same car accident. A year after the accident, he's out at a team function and he meets this woman who he doesn't know her name, but she's dressed as Princess Leia. He is an absolute Star Wars nut. I can say that because I'm a Star Wars nut. They have a kind of disastrous one night stand and then she's gone in the morning and he doesn't know who she is. Then we flash forward 2 years later. He's living in, I think it's called Bluebell, Texas, small town. He is the local high school football coach. He's sort of using it as a stopover as he builds up his career and his profile so that he can get into coaching in the NFL. And as we open up the book, we get the perspective of Nova, who was the woman from his one night stand. And she has just recently moved back to Bluebell, Texas to take care of her 15-year-old sister after the death of their mother. Her sister is autistic and she is trying to make the best of a situation. She needs to find a job. She needs to provide safety and security for her sister. As she's coming home one night, she sees this car tear out of her house after crushing her garden, which has a lot of significance to her because it was, you know, the garden that her mother had grown. The person in the car was attending the party next door. So she, you know, stomps into her neighbor's house ready to rip him a new one and then realizes it's Ronan, who she had a one night stand with, which does not help her mood. Anyway, she tells him off and walks out. He doesn't recognize her. She 100% recognizes him. Eventually, he needs to fake date someone because the local town busybodies are trying to set him up with everyone they can think of, and he wants them off his back. The two end up working together at the local high school because that's the only place where she can get a job. There's a lot of situations where they're forced together both by their fake dating plot and by the fact that they work together. This one is kind of dramatic, but it was entertaining, so yeah, I think this is my first Madden-Mills book and I had a good time reading it. It was a very good, easy read after my first day back at work. So those are the books that I read this week. In the comments, I'd love to know if you have read any of them or if you're planning on picking any of them up. If you want to let me know that you're here but you don't want to leave a comment, feel free to leave a fruit emoji that represents your favorite type of jam, which may potentially be the most complicated way I've ever asked anyone to leave an emoji, but here we are. I hope that wherever you are in the world, you're staying safe and healthy, and I will see you in my next video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye everyone.